Here are your ingredients, starting with the main ingredient, Napa cabbage, also known as Chinese cabbage. If you can't find it, I have heard of people substituting Savoy cabbage, but I've never tried it, so I can't guarantee the results. Every now and then I have to go to 2 or 3 stores before I can find Napa cabbage, but you can find it. It's around. Next on the list is leek for my recipe. The more traditional is scallions. If you don't want to use leek and you want to use scallions, you're actually doing more of an original, authentic Korean recipe. But just know that you are then substituting my substitution with you're substituting the substitution and going full circle back to, anyway, I'm talking too much. I like leek. Scallion works too. You're going to need some radish. This is a daikon radish. That's my go-to. If you can find Korean radish, that might be a little better, but they're almost indistinguishable. Purple radish is probably close to the same too. If not, I think watermelon radish would actually be kind of a fun thing to play with. I never have, but it's a great radish. And if worst comes to worst, just good old normal little red radishes, probably. Well, actually, I've used them before. They work just fine. They're maybe not quite as good. The ginger is important. If you can find really tender, sweet ginger, and the way I can tell, I think, is that the skin is kind of tender and almost translucent, and it's very soft. It comes off very easily. So you want the freshest, sweetest ginger you can get. And then garlic is just garlic. There's not much to say about it except that it's yummy. And then, of course, fish sauce. I like this Red Boat because it's organic, but I've also used Squid brand and Golden Boy brand, and they're great too. And then last, but certainly not least, you need some chili powder. I like coarse ground Korean chili powder. If you can't find the coarse ground, the fine ground works okay too. It's a little bit different tasting. Really, try to find the coarse ground Korean chili. And if you can't find either of those, you might have to substitute something, but I've never tried it, so I can't guarantee what you'll end up with. You're going to need some kind of a fermenting vessel, and what that means is that it provides a way for the gases that get produced inside the jar to get out, but you also want to keep the outside air from getting in. The air in your house and everywhere in the whole world has mold spores in it. And if those mold spores get into your kimchi, it's going to grow mold, and then it won't be safe to eat, and it'll just be kind of nasty. So we're keeping the outside air from getting in, but we're also allowing the carbon dioxide to get out. If you don't have a way for the carbon dioxide to get out, it can actually shatter your jar. It's what's called a bottle bomb. I've had it happen. It's a horrible mess. Now, you can buy these online. I think they're called the Perfect Pickler. But they're a little pricey by my estimation. I think they're $25, $30. If you can just get the parts, just a plastic lid, drill a hole in it, and then put the valve in there, it's like $3, $5. It's a lot less expensive. But if you don't want to mess with that, yeah, you can go online and find this thing called a Perfect Pickler. I like these cylindrically shaped ones. They're just a lot easier to clean. These curly tubed ones work fine, but no matter what you do, the juice from the kimchi is going to get up in there, and it's just kind of a pain to try and clean that. There's also a little silver cup or a ramekin, and that helps contain some of the juices, but I'm going to tell you that no matter what you do, some of the juice is going to get out. There's just no way to avoid it. But this little tin cup probably reduces the amount of juice that escapes, so that's cool. As for the jar, I use a 1/2 gallon sized mason jar. It seems to be just about the perfect size for the recipe I'm going to show you. Now make your brine. I usually start with a little bit of warm water at the bottom of the jar to dissolve the salt, and then I fill it the rest of the way with cool water. Don't use expensive salt here, just your normal cheap standard salt. Remove the first few outer leaves and set them aside. We're going to use those for something later. Now cut up the cabbage into basically squares of 1.5 to 2 inches. It doesn't have to be exact. Now working with a whole head of cabbage can be a little bit unwieldy, So I slice it in half lengthwise, and then I put the half that I'm not working with into a very large mixing bowl. Pour the brine into the mixing bowl with the cut up cabbage. You need enough brine to where you can submerge all the cabbage, which will probably be 2 or 3 batches. Just make it as you go. Now take those outer leaves that we set aside and lie them on top of the cabbage. We're going to want to get as much coverage here as we can. Put a plate on top of those leaves to keep all the cabbage submerged, and then I set that whole mixing bowl aside somewhere that the cats can't get to it for about 8-ish hours. If you haven't already, wash all of your vegetables. And I usually take the first layer off the leek because sometimes there's dirt in there and I don't want to eat that. Then go ahead and peel the daikon. That outer layer is just kind of bitter and doesn't have any particularly special nutrition. Contrary to popular belief, the nutrition is throughout the whole vegetable. Another kind of extra thing I do that is not in some recipes, but I think it matters, is I do peel the ginger. I think it's just a little bit sweeter if you get all the skin off. One thing I do to make it a little bit easier to peel is I'll impale it with a fork so that I can get these smaller pieces without cutting my finger. How much ginger? About this much ginger, and the same goes with the garlic. I do peel the garlic, and I use about this much. Now take that very exactly and precisely measured garlic and ginger and put it into a food processor with a 1/4 cup of fish sauce and a 1/2 cup of coarse ground Korean chili powder. Grind it into a paste. Sometimes I deliberately make a little extra here and put it into the freezer because it's just really delicious and versatile. Now, as delicious as this stuff is, you might want to take note of the smell, because this is what your kimchi is going to smell like for the next few days while it's fermenting. If you find that objectionable, then you might want to put it in the garage or a room in your house where it's okay to stink it up for a few days. And yes, the smell will go away. After the cabbage has been soaking for about 8-ish hours, pour off the brine and remove those outer leaves that we had put on the top. We're done with those. From here through the rest of the process, make sure you have some kind of a towel nearby. Your hands are going to get covered in that fish sauce, and it's nice to just have a towel really handy that you can wipe your hands off with. Speaking of which, here we go. Put the paste in the mixing bowl. You'll probably need a spatula to get it all out, and mix it up real good with your hands. And now your hands are going to be covered in fish sauce and chili. You need a towel nearby. The next steps are a lot easier if you have a little mandolin, which I do, and so I slice up the daikon and the leek into the cabbage. Now mix it up real good with your hands. The next step is going to be a lot easier if you have a canning funnel like this one. We're going to put all the kimchi into our fermenting vessel, and if we have something to mash it down with, that's even better. In a perfect world, we'll have exactly enough kimchi to fill this mason jar all the way to the top without much of an air gap. And in this case, I got lucky. My kimchi filled the mason jar exactly to the top. When I got up that morning, I had no idea that I was actually waking up in a perfect world, but how do you like that? Anyway, the times that I've not been able to quite fill the jar, what I've done is just taken some normal, regular cabbage and stuffed that into the top until I can fill the air gap. That doesn't become part of the recipe. When I'm done, that gets discarded. Now take that little silver ramekin and place it right in the center of the top of the mouth. The idea behind this is that it's supposed to catch some of the juices before they come leaking out the sides and the top, but I'm going to tell you, it only does so much. The juices are going to come leaking out the sides and the top no matter what you do, but that's a good sign. That means it's alive. That means it's healthy. Now screw the lid on, making sure that the hole in the lid is directly above that silver ramekin. And then you need to pour a little bit of water in the top. The idea behind that is to keep the outside air from getting in. Screw it on real tight and put it on a plate because, as I said, this is going to leak. I'm going to say it again, put it on a plate and set it somewhere where it's going to be safe from the cats, the children, the oversensitive noses, and where if it leaks a little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world. And now we'll look at our daily updates. Monday morning, and there's good news and bad news. The good news is that the juice is spilling out the sides and filling up the plate. That means it's healthy, that it's alive, that the happy bugs are in there doing their thing. The bad news is that it's leaking out the sides when we really want it to be leaking out the top. The problem, as it turned out, is that the lid lost its gasket, but luckily I had a spare, so I just popped a gasket in there and put it back on. I poured all the liquid off the plate and rinsed it off, and then I put the whole thing back together, and we'll take another look tomorrow. Okay, this is Tuesday, and this is what we want to see. The excess liquid is being pushed up into the valve. Again, that means it's healthy, it's doing its thing. So far, so good. And we do want to check that valve every day and make sure there's some liquid in it. If it gets dried out, then air can get in, and that can cause mold to grow. And that is not safe to eat. So every day when you check this, make sure there's enough liquid in the valve to keep air from getting in. Wednesday morning, still looking really good. You can see that the excess liquid is coming out the top and it's spilling out onto the plate. That's what we want to see. Another thing that I noticed is that this batch is really loud. You can literally hear the fermentation happening and you can see the bubbles coming up to the top. That's a great sign. If I were to open this up and eat it right now, it would actually be kind of fizzy, which can be fun, but we're going to just let it keep going. And if I opened it suddenly, it would come gushing out like a shaken up can of beer, so we definitely don't want to do that. Thursday morning, not much to report. It's still looking very good. You can tell that the activity has slowed down a little bit because the liquid that's come out has begun to dry up slightly and getting a little sticky. But that's fine. This is about what we want to see at this point. Friday morning looks pretty much exactly the same. Now, sometimes at this stage, you'll notice that the liquid at the top has begun to recede, and that's actually just fine. But this looks really good. Saturday morning, and not much to report. It still looks really good. There's enough liquid in the valve to keep air from getting in. The kimchi is still going all the way to the top of the jar. And if it had receded a little bit, that would actually be okay too, so long as all of the kimchi is submerged under the liquid. Okay, Sunday morning and the moment of truth. It looks really good. There's still liquid in the valve to keep it safe, and the kimchi still goes all the way to the top of the jar. Okay, let's open her up. I've taken the liberty of emptying out the liquid from the valve, which is kind of cheating, but it's just because I don't want to make a mess. Now, the thing we have to be honest about here is that it is kind of smelly stuff. So we're going to take a few measures to mitigate that smell. For whatever reason, this batch really wasn't too smelly. I don't know why. For whatever reason, every batch kind of has its own personality. You can never make this exactly the same any two times. This one was kind of not that smelly, and it was really loud, and that makes me think that if I'd opened it up, it would have been really fizzy. Now, one thing I do to kind of contain the smell is that I use this thermos. And I just fill it up with as much kimchi as I'm going to eat over the next few days. And that's actually great because I wouldn't really want to wrestle with this big half-gallon jar every time I wanted a little bit of kimchi. So I just fill this thermos up, I close it really tightly, and then the big jar stays in the back of the fridge really tightly closed with a regular mason jar lid. And actually, a week from now, it's going to taste a little bit different. It's going to be just a little bit more sour. Now, this is going to be another occasion where that canning funnel is really going to be your friend. It's going to be a lot easier to get the kimchi into the thermos with a canning funnel. Another thing that will make your life easier is a nice long pair of tongs. This is another step where it's not a bad idea to have a towel nearby, just because you might have a spill, or in this case, I just wanted a place to set my lid. Now, as you can see, that little tin ramekin is completely full of liquid. I'm going to take it off camera, empty it out, and rinse it off, and you're not going to see it again for the rest of this video. Now, at this juncture, one could be forgiven for sort of wondering, is this stuff really safe to eat? I mean, it's been sitting on my counter for a week. When I first started getting into this, I saw a post from a guy who grew up in Korea answering the same question, and he thought it was hilarious. He said, no, kimchi is what we eat to keep from getting sick. And that's been my experience. I feel like this stuff is great for the immunity. Every time I feel like I have a cold coming on, I go straight for the kimchi, and it could be coincidence, but it seems like a lot of times it really boosts my immunity, even with like tummy issues. And that might seem counterintuitive that something so acidic and spicy fixes the tummy, but it really, really does. It's amazing. This batch looks really good. Now, one thing I do that I don't know if it's really even necessary, but I sometimes pull out just the very top layer just in case a little bit of mold got in there that I can't see. I'm probably being overcautious, but it's just something I do. The rest of this is just as obvious and self-explanatory as it could be. I put the canning funnel in my thermos. I use the long tongs to fill it up as much as I can. I close it really tightly. I close the big jar really tightly, and everything goes in the fridge. But before you do, give it a good rinse and wipe down. That thing's been sitting in a puddle of kimchi juice for a week, and you don't want that in the shelf of your fridge. So give it a good rinse, give it a good wipe, and you're good to go.